The first time I realized my husband had bought a house with another woman, I was standing in our driveway holding a bag of frozen peas that had already started melting down my wrist. It sounds strange now, the way tragedy arrives wrapped inside ordinary moments. I remember the afternoon sunlight falling across the hood of his truck in long gold streaks while I searched for the insurance papers he swore were inside the glove compartment. The air smelled like rain even though the sky was clear, and somewhere down the street a lawnmower droned softly like background noise in somebody else's peaceful life. I had only gone outside because our daughter needed a copy of the registration for a scholarship form, and my husband, Daniel, was late again. At the time, I still believed late meant tired, busy, overworked. I still believed in innocent explanations. The envelope was shoved underneath an old receipt book beneath the passenger seat. Thick cream-colored papers folded neatly in thirds. My first thought was honestly that maybe it was another bill he had forgotten to pay. Daniel forgot things constantly. Wallets, lunches, anniversaries, entire conversations. I used to joke that if his head wasn't attached to his body, he would leave that somewhere too. But then I saw his name. And beside it, another woman's. Claire Morrison. The peas slipped from my hand and hit the driveway with a wet sound I still hear sometimes when the house gets quiet at night. For almost 30 years, I had shared a bed with that man. I knew the shape of his shoulders in darkness. I knew the way he rubbed his chest when anxious and how he whistled softly while grilling hamburgers on Sundays. I knew he hated mushrooms and loved old country songs and cried privately when his father died because he didn't want our daughter to see him break. And somehow I had not known he bought a house with another woman. I wish I could tell you I opened the papers calmly, that I handled everything with grace from the beginning. But the truth is my hands shook so badly I nearly tore the documents pulling them apart. Mortgage agreements, property tax estimates, closing paperwork dated 3 months earlier. 3 months. That meant every evening he came home smelling faintly of sawdust and fresh paint. Every Saturday, he said he was helping a coworker renovate an office space. Every missing dollar from our savings account had already been attached to this secret life. I stood there staring at the words while the neighborhood carried on around me. Somebody's dog barked twice. Wind pushed dead leaves across the sidewalk. A little boy rode past on a bicycle laughing at something invisible. And my whole marriage quietly split open without making a sound. The strange thing about betrayal is how long it takes your body to catch up to what your eyes already know. My mind kept searching for mistakes. Maybe it was business-related. Maybe Claire Morrison was a realtor. Maybe Daniel had co-signed something for somebody at work. Maybe there was an explanation buried somewhere inside those papers that could still return my life to me. I folded everything carefully and slid it back into the envelope because denial can make a woman gentle with the very thing destroying her. Inside the house, our daughter Emily sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by college brochures and half-finished notes. She looked up and smiled when I walked in. "You find it?" she asked. Her voice sounded young in a way that hurt me suddenly. I handed her the registration paper and forced myself to smile back. "Your dad keeps everything in weird places." She laughed softly. That man would lose his own funeral. Usually I would have laughed too. Instead, I opened the freezer and stood there pretending to rearrange vegetables because cold air against my face gave me an excuse for the tears burning behind my eyes. Daniel and I had married young. Too young, probably. I was 19, and he was 23 with rough carpenter hands, and this shy, crooked smile that made me trust him instantly. We built our life slowly, paycheck by paycheck. Cheap apartments with thin walls. Shared cars that rattled when they started. Second-hand furniture. Burnt dinners. Long nights rocking a colicky baby while bills piled on the counter. None of it felt hard back then because we were together. Or at least I thought we were. Over the years, we became one of those quiet, middle-aged couples people stop noticing. We grocery shopped together on Fridays. We argued mildly about thermostat settings. We fell asleep during television shows. Our marriage had softened around the edges, but I believed softness meant safety. Now I wonder how many women discover betrayal not because their husbands change, but because they stay exactly the same. That night, Daniel came home carrying takeout containers from my favorite Mexican restaurant. He kissed my forehead while setting food on the counter. Long day, he sighed. I watched him carefully then. Really watched him. The tiny crease beside his mouth. The dust on his boots. The familiar exhaustion in his eyes. And I hated how normal he looked. You okay? He asked when he caught me staring. For one terrifying second, I almost asked him directly. I almost held those mortgage papers in front of his face and demanded the truth right there beside the sour cream and tortilla chips. But fear has a way of making people quiet. Just tired, I whispered. He nodded easily. Too easily. During dinner, Emily talked excitedly about colleges while Daniel listened with practiced attention, nodding at the right moments, asking careful questions about dormitories and tuition deadlines. Watching him talk about paying for our daughter's future while secretly draining our savings for another home felt surreal, like sitting beside an actor performing my husband instead of the real man. At one point, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I almost pulled away. Later that night, after Emily went upstairs, I lay awake beside him listening to the ceiling fan spin slowly overhead. Daniel fell asleep quickly, breathing deep and steady like a man carrying no secrets at all. I stared into darkness wondering where exactly marriages begin to disappear. Not explode. Disappear. Because looking back now, there was no single dramatic moment before this. No lipstick stains. No perfume. No midnight phone calls. Just tiny absences collecting quietly over time like dust settling in corners you stop checking. I thought about the savings account first. Almost $20,000 gone over the last year in strange withdrawals Daniel always explained away. Work expenses. Helping his brother. Unexpected taxes. I believed him because after decades together, trust becomes automatic. Like breathing. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe love should never become automatic. Around 2 a.m, Daniel turned in his sleep and rested his arm across my waist the same way he had done for years. Reflexively. Comfortably. His hand felt warm through my shirt. I cried silently beside him until sunrise. Stay with me, because what happens next changed everything. The next morning I made pancakes like nothing inside me had cracked open. That's the part people rarely talk about after betrayal. The performance of normalcy. The way your body still moves through ordinary routines while your mind feels trapped underwater. I stood at the stove flipping pancakes while butter hissed softly in the pan, and Daniel sat at the kitchen counter drinking coffee and reading sports scores on his phone as if our marriage weren't quietly rotting beneath us. Emily rushed downstairs half-dressed and late for class, grabbing toast with one hand while stuffing notebooks into her backpack. Mom, can you sign this before I forget again? Dad, are you coming to my debate thing Friday? Where's my charger? Life kept moving around me like nothing had changed. Daniel smiled at her. Wouldn't miss it. But something about his voice sounded rehearsed now that I knew. I signed her paper carefully because my hands still trembled sometimes when I looked directly at him. I kept noticing tiny details I had ignored before. The way he angled his phone screen away from me. The new cologne he started wearing 6 months earlier. The fact that he had become oddly protective of his truck. Every memory suddenly rearranged itself into something darker. After he left for work, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at our family calendar. Birthdays circled in blue ink. Emily's scholarship deadlines. Grocery lists scribbled along the edges. Little ordinary pieces of a life I thought was stable. Then I opened our banking app again. I had checked it before, of course. But this time I looked differently. Like someone searching for fingerprints at a crime scene. Withdrawal after withdrawal appeared over the last year. Some small enough to ignore. Others large enough to make my stomach tighten. $900. $1,200. $3,000. Always followed by explanations. Work issue. Truck repairs. Helping Steve. I remembered every single lie because I had accepted every single one without argument. There's a particular humiliation in realizing trust made you easy to deceive. Around noon, my friend Teresa called to ask if I wanted to help plan a church fundraiser. Her voice sounded cheerful and familiar, and hearing ordinary conversation nearly broke me. You sound tired, she said gently after a pause. I didn't sleep much. You and Daniel okay? The question froze me. I looked out the kitchen window toward the driveway where his truck usually Saturday. Why would you ask that? I don't know. Just a feeling. He seemed distracted lately. Distracted. Such a harmless word for what he had actually been doing. I almost told her then. The mortgage papers. The missing money. The woman's name sitting beside his like a second wife hidden between legal documents. But shame sealed my mouth shut. Because even though I had done nothing wrong, betrayal somehow still felt embarrassing. That afternoon, I drove past Daniel's office for the first time in years. I told myself it was accidental, that I was already nearby picking up groceries. But deep down, I think part of me needed proof he still existed inside the world I thought we shared. The parking lot shimmered beneath hot sunlight. Construction trucks lined the fence. Men in reflective vests moved between equipment carrying lumber and tools. And then I saw her. Not because I knew her face already. I didn't. I knew her because Daniel was smiling at her in a way I had not seen in years. She stood beside him holding blueprints against her chest while wind pushed strands of dark hair across her face. Nothing about her looked dramatic or glamorous. She looked ordinary. Mid-40s maybe. Simple jeans. Work boots. Tired posture. That somehow hurt worse. Because affairs always seem easier to understand when the other woman looks unreal. Untouchable. But Claire looked like someone who packed lunches and worried about bills and bought hand soap in bulk just like me. Daniel touched her elbow while speaking. A small gesture. Barely anything. Yet my chest tightened so sharply I had to grip the steering wheel. Then something happened I still replay sometimes at night. Claire laughed softly at something he said, and Daniel looked at her with tenderness. Not lust. Not excitement. Tenderness. Like home. I drove away before either of them saw me. That evening he came home late again smelling faintly of paint and cedar wood. I stood at the sink washing dishes while he loosened his tie behind me. You okay? He asked quietly. The question almost made me laugh. Why do you keep asking me that? He paused. You've seemed distant lately. Distant. I dried my hands slowly and turned toward him. For one long second our eyes locked, and I wondered if he knew. Maybe guilt had already started leaking through my silence. Maybe cheaters develop instincts for danger. But his face remained calm. Concerned even. I realized then how easily people can live double lives when they learn to separate themselves into compartments. Later that night, after he fell asleep on the couch during television commercials, I searched his jacket pockets for the first time in my marriage. Even now I hate admitting that. There was nothing obvious inside. Receipts. Gum wrappers. Spare change. But tucked into his wallet behind old business cards was a tiny hardware store receipt from a town 30 minutes away. The same town listed on the mortgage papers. My stomach dropped. I looked up the address online while he snored softly in the living room. A small white house appeared on the screen. 2 bedrooms. Front porch. Freshly painted shutters. Somewhere inside that little house were dishes and towels and light bulbs my husband had probably helped choose. I zoomed closer on the listing photos until my vision blurred. There was a yellow coffee mug sitting beside the kitchen sink. And for reasons I still cannot fully explain, that mug shattered me more than the mortgage itself. Because houses become homes through tiny ordinary objects. Coffee mugs. Blankets. Toothbrushes. Grocery lists. That meant this wasn't temporary. This wasn't reckless. This was a life. The next morning, I almost confronted him before work. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror shaving while sunlight spilled across the counter, and I watched his reflection wondering how a person keeps speaking normally while carrying this kind of deception inside them. Instead, I asked quietly, do you ever think people can completely disappear from a marriage without the other person noticing? He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I don't know. Just thinking. He rinsed his razor carefully. Marriage goes through phases, honey. Honey. That word nearly destroyed me. Then he kissed my forehead and walked out the door carrying secrets bigger than our entire life together. 3 days later, Emily asked why I kept crying in the laundry room. And I realized my daughter had noticed my heartbreak before my husband noticed my silence. Stay with me, because what happens next changed everything. I found the photographs on a Thursday evening while rain tapped softly against the garage roof. Daniel had left his truck unlocked again. Or maybe part of him wanted to get caught by then. I still don't know. The garage smelled like wet concrete and motor oil while thunder rolled somewhere far away beyond the neighborhood. I sat inside the truck holding a flashlight because the overhead bulb had burned out months earlier, searching through the center console for reasons I could not fully explain to myself anymore. Maybe I wanted proof strong enough to finally kill denial. Maybe I needed something undeniable before I allowed my marriage to die inside my mind. The photographs were tucked inside a plain white envelope beneath an old map. There weren't many. 6 pictures total. But 6 was enough. In the first one, Daniel stood on the porch of that small white house beside Claire. His arm rested around her shoulders naturally, comfortably. They weren't posing dramatically. They looked settled, like people who belonged to each other. Another photo showed paint cans stacked in the living room while Claire smiled at the camera holding pizza boxes. Daniel looked exhausted and happy at the same time. In one picture, they were planting flowers. I stared at that photograph longest. Because it takes intention to plant flowers somewhere. It means you expect to stay. My hands shook so badly the photos slipped into my lap. Rain hammered harder overhead while memories crashed through me all at once. Every late night. Every missing dollar. Every excuse. Every moment I defended him to myself. Then I saw the last photograph. Daniel lying asleep on a couch with his head resting against Claire's shoulder while sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't glamorous. It was intimate in the worst possible way. I sat there for almost an hour, unable to move. When Daniel finally pulled into the driveway, headlights swept across the garage wall, and panic snapped me awake. I shoved the envelope back exactly where I found it and hurried inside before he entered the house. My heartbeat felt violent beneath my ribs. He walked into the kitchen minutes later carrying Chinese takeout containers and smiling tiredly. Sorry I'm late. I looked at him standing there beneath our kitchen light and realized something inside me had finally hardened. Not hatred. Something quieter. The end of illusion. During dinner, he talked about work delays while Emily complained about finals. I answered automatically when spoken to, but my mind kept replaying those photographs. Daniel asleep beside another woman. Daniel building another home while ours slowly emptied out around me. At one point, Emily laughed at something her father said, and I suddenly had to excuse myself because the sound physically hurt. In the bathroom, I pressed a towel against my mouth to stop myself from making noise. I remember staring at my reflection thinking, you are disappearing. Not because he cheated. Because I had spent months shrinking around his lies without realizing it. That night after Emily went upstairs, Daniel found me folding laundry in silence. You've been somewhere else lately, he said carefully. I kept folding one of his shirts. Have I? Yes. The dryer hummed softly behind us. Rain still ticked against the windows. Finally, he stepped closer. Did I do something? I looked up then. Really looked at him. And I asked the question that had been rotting inside me for days. Who is Claire? Everything stopped. I saw it immediately. The tiny collapse in his face before he recovered. A flicker lasting less than a second. But it was enough. Who? Claire Morrison. The silence afterward felt enormous. Daniel sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. His shoulders sagged in a way I had never seen before, like exhaustion finally outweighed performance. How did you find out? Not denial. Not confusion. Just surrender. I think that was the moment my heart broke completely. Because some small foolish part of me had still hoped for misunderstanding. I sat across from him clutching one of his folded shirts so tightly my fingers hurt. You bought a house with her. He covered his face briefly with both hands. It's complicated. No, I whispered. It really isn't. The clock above the television ticked loudly. Finally, he spoke again. I never meant for this to happen. Those words felt rehearsed, worn smooth through repetition. How long? He stared at the floor. About 2 years. 2 years. My chest tightened so sharply I thought I might actually stop breathing. While we were saving for Emily's college, his eyes filled instantly with shame. I was putting money back slowly. You used our daughter's tuition money to buy another house. Hearing the sentence spoken aloud changed something in the room. Even Daniel flinched. She was going through a divorce, he said quietly. At first, I was just helping her find a place. I laughed then. A small broken sound I barely recognized as my own. And accidentally became her husband? No. But you slept there. Silence answered me. How many times? A lot. I nodded slowly because numbers no longer mattered. What were you planning to do? He rubbed his forehead hard. I didn't know. That's not true. His eyes finally met mine then, and for the first time all evening I saw honesty. I thought eventually I'd choose. The sentence landed softly, almost gently, which somehow made it crueler. I stared at this man I had loved most of my life and realized he truly believed keeping both lives alive was possible for a while. Me in this house. Claire in the other one. Two women carrying pieces of the same man while he delayed consequences. I loved you, I whispered. Daniel's face crumpled. I love you. No, I said quietly. You loved having me. He started crying before I did. That surprised me. Not dramatic sobbing. Just exhausted tears sliding down the face of a man who finally ran out of places to hide. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did anyway. He nodded. And then neither of us spoke for a very long time. The house creaked softly around us while rain faded outside. Upstairs, Emily moved around her bedroom, unaware her childhood home had just split apart downstairs beneath dim yellow light. Eventually, Daniel whispered, I'll leave if you want. The truth is, I had imagined this moment differently during sleepless nights. I thought betrayal would create screaming, throwing things, rage. Instead, I only felt unbearably tired. I don't want you to leave tonight, I said softly. I want you to tell Emily the truth tomorrow. Fear crossed his face immediately. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing how his daughter saw him. And that hurt almost as much as the affair itself. Stay with me, because what happens next changed everything. The next morning smelled like coffee and grief. I woke before sunrise and sat alone at the kitchen table listening to the refrigerator hum while pale blue light crept slowly through the windows. My wedding ring rested beside my coffee mug. I had slipped it off sometime during the night without even realizing it. After 30 years, my finger looked strangely bare. Daniel came downstairs quietly around 6. He looked older somehow, as if confession had aged him overnight. His eyes were swollen from crying, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt no instinct to comfort him. We sat in silence while the coffee maker sputtered softly between us. Finally, he whispered, What do you want me to say to Emily? The truth. His shoulders tightened. Not the version that protects you, I continued. The truth. At 8 o'clock, we called Emily into the kitchen. I will never forget her face. She walked in half awake wearing oversized pajamas, expecting ordinary morning conversation. Then she saw us sitting there together in silence and immediately understood something terrible had happened. What's wrong? Daniel tried speaking twice before words finally came out. I made some mistakes. Emily frowned instantly. What kind of mistakes? I watched my husband struggle to destroy his daughter's image of him in real time. His hands trembled against the coffee mug. I've been seeing someone else. The room went still. Emily blinked once like her brain had not processed the sentence correctly. What? There's another woman. I looked down because the pain in my daughter's voice was worse than my own. How long? She whispered. About 2 years. She stared at him as though he had suddenly become a stranger wearing her father's face. Then her eyes moved to me. You knew. Since last week. Emily stood up so quickly her chair scraped sharply against the floor. Tears filled her eyes immediately, but anger arrived first. Are you serious right now? She snapped at him. While Mom's been killing herself trying to save money for college, Daniel looked shattered. Emily. No. Don't. Her voice broke violently. Did you really use our money for her? Silence answered again. That silence told her everything. Emily started crying then. Real crying. The kind that shakes through someone unexpectedly. I moved toward her automatically, and she collapsed against me while staring over my shoulder at her father with disbelief so raw it almost felt visible in the room. I don't understand, she kept whispering. I don't understand. Neither did I. Not completely. Daniel tried apologizing, but apologies sound hollow when standing beside consequences this large. Eventually, Emily ran upstairs and locked herself inside her room. Daniel buried his face in his hands. I ruined everything. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. No. You ruined trust. Everything else was already real. 3 days later, he moved into the White House with Claire. I did not scream when he packed. I did not beg him to stay. I simply stood in the doorway of our bedroom watching 30 years disappear into cardboard boxes while sunlight crossed the carpet inch by inch. The strangest part was how ordinary it all looked. Jeans folded neatly. Razors wrapped in towels. Shoes placed carefully into bins. People imagine heartbreak as dramatic destruction. But sometimes it's just a man carrying winter coats out the front door while the woman who loved him watches quietly from the hallway. Before leaving, Daniel paused beside me holding his truck keys. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. And maybe he truly was. But remorse cannot rebuild what deception slowly dismantled. After he left, the house became painfully quiet. Emily avoided speaking about him for weeks. Some nights I heard her crying through the wall, and I would sit outside her bedroom door feeling helpless because mothers can protect children from many things, but not from discovering their parents are human. Teresa eventually came over with soup and sat beside me on the couch while I finally told someone everything. She listened without interrupting while afternoon rain streaked the windows. "You know what the worst part is?" I admitted softly. "I still miss him sometimes." She squeezed my hand gently. "Of course you do. You lost a whole life." And she was right. People talk about leaving marriages like walking away from a person. But it's bigger than that. You lose routines, private jokes, familiar footsteps, future plans, the version of yourself that existed inside that relationship. Healing came slowly after that. Not beautifully, not perfectly, just slowly. I picked up extra hours at the library where I worked. Emily received more scholarship money than we expected. We started eating dinner together at the table again instead of separately in our rooms. Little by little, silence inside the house stopped feeling wounded and started feeling peaceful. Months later, Daniel asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no, but I went. He looked tired when he walked into the diner. Older. Smaller somehow. We talked awkwardly about Emily at first before he finally admitted things with Claire were already falling apart. I remember stirring cream into my coffee while listening to him describe confusion and regret and loneliness. And for the first time, I realized something important. His unhappiness no longer belonged to me. That realization felt like freedom. When we stood to leave, Daniel looked at me quietly and said, "I don't expect forgiveness." I nodded. "That's good." Then after a pause, I added gently, "But I hope someday you become honest enough to stop hurting people who love you." He cried in the parking lot after that. I didn't. Because by then, I had already survived the worst part. A year later, Emily and I painted the kitchen pale yellow. We laughed the entire afternoon while music played through dusty speakers and paint ended up all over our hands. Sunlight poured through open windows carrying the smell of cut grass and summer heat, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt alive again. Not because everything healed perfectly, but because we did. Sometimes at night, I still think about the woman I used to be before I found those papers in Daniel's truck. The woman who believed loyalty guaranteed safety. I miss her innocence occasionally. But I admire the woman who survived her much more. So tell me honestly, if you discovered the person you trusted most had secretly built another life behind your back, would you walk away immediately, or would part of you still fight to save the years you shared together? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe so you never miss a story. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, you are never alone.